Okay, welcome everybody. Good. So I believe this is going to be the last round of discussion here on the stage today. If I am wrong, let me know, but I don't think I'm wrong. And we are going to conclude this discussion with a very stimulating, I'll say, Q&A and discussion. And just trying to wrap up the day, bring a little bit of some of the takeaways in relation to youth, in relation to the theme of the summit, migration and refugees, and to talk about going forward, how we're going to take the outcome document and the agreement that was adopted today on to the field. And there's no better, I would say, panelist to join me this afternoon than having the chief of the humanitarian response at UNFPA, Ugochi Daniels. Look forward to hear from you, and also my good friend Foni Joyce, who has been like her and I. We have been at different events. I think by now we know each other fairly well. So I know all the questions I want to ask you. But before starting with you, I would like to ask you from UNFPA's perspective, and you have been leading and really playing a significant role in moving the compact for engaging youth in humanitarian work. Now, having observed the discussion we had today at the summit and also the outcome document, are you encouraged? Are you feeling that we have a renewed commitment to give a mandate and a push for humanitarian workers across the UN system and the international system to really take this and go in an environment that is conducive for their missions to be successful?
Thank you very much. And certainly, I feel, not just me personally, but as an organization, UNFPA is very, very committed to the Youth Compact that was launched today. And the new signatories to the compact is certainly cause for celebration, and not just celebration, but really for action. I was speaking to Foni, and I was talking about how when I joined the UN 15 years ago, it was on a program for young people and talking about youth participation. And 15 years later, we're still talking about youth participation. But this time, we believe the compact is the mechanism that is going to make the difference on the ground for young people.
What's the difference? Because I wasn't here 15 years ago. So what's the difference? Like, if you really candidly judge youth participation 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and now, what, to your taste and from your observations, and now you are directly engaged with the question of youth participation in the most difficult settings, the humanitarian setting, what do you think are the main achievements, or like I would say the areas where we need to do a better job?
Okay, so there are three things. 15 years ago, we were still trying to define what is youth participation. We were also looking at, does youth participation make a difference? And also, youth were very much seen as part of the problem. The big difference now is we've seen the value of working with young people in Nepal, in the Philippines, in many countries where we've responded. Young people themselves have been the first responders. And we also recognize the importance. I mean, now we talk about a localized response and local actors being involved in the response. And young people have been fantastic in coming forward and being, I mean, not just the first responders, but also being the ones to drive change within their communities for young people.
Very good. Well, I think the messages were well delivered. Do you want to add anything? Well, I think part of the reason, like, I think it answers the question, because we are making more noise 15 years later, and youth are making more noise, so it answers. I'd like to bring this to you, Foni, and we have seen the discussion today, and deliberations, lots of speeches, many side events, and all of them, and many of them have been referring to the role of young people and how young people can be engaged in driving a better agenda for humanity, as we like to put it at the UN. I think some of the easy tasks for you, like to be heard, be seen, is like kind of ticked, because you are here, your voice has been well heard. So I want to know substantively, what do you feel is still lacking, or where we can do extra push?
A lot of youth, like I feel a lot of youth have something to say about all this that is happening. And many of them would have liked to be here today, but they couldn't be here. Because as a refugee, documentation definitely is one of the biggest thing that is lacking. As much as we'll speak about youth engagement, we want to do this with them, we need, like, I'm looking forward to this compact counteracting this documentation issue. It's really important that governments understand, or the place we're living in understand what these documentations are, because they don't understand what these are. A particular country will say they're a signatory to the 1951 convention, but they don't recognize this document. For instance, before I came here, I have to go through an airport. But when I get to the airport, the officer looks at the document and the officer is asking, what is this? And the same place that I'm staying is part of this convention, yeah? They don't understand what this documentation means. So it's really important, if we want youth to be engaged, to participate, to act, to be listened to, or to give some of the recommendation, we also need to look into the fact that the places we stay need to understand what are these documentation. There's need to sensitize people about this is what it means. This particular document means this. This means this. Because I feel as much as we will talk about all this, we will want to move ahead. Many youth will be left outside. They will be locked out because their documentations are not recognized.
So this is a very important question of mobility, of being recognized with the documentations you have when you travel. But share with us a little bit of your story and the story of the other fellow youth who maybe are not privileged enough to be sitting today and sharing their views in this summit. What do you think is, or how do you describe the struggle of young refugees today? I mean, you yourself a refugee and you're still experiencing some of these challenges. But walk us through this. I mean, if you really want to wrap up this day by reminding all of us the experience of young refugees. I'm not asking here about only the struggles and the difficulties, etc. I think, but just humanize the experience in a way, and the resilience that young people can bring to the response of their communities. What do you have to say about that?
I'll use myself as a test subject here. When my parents fled to Nairobi, we got to Nairobi, and we had to live this new whole life, a life that you don't really understand, a life that is full of difficulties, yeah? And you have to go to school, but you understand there's some exceptions you have to make. So you decide, if you go to school, what will you lack? So if you go to school, you have to sacrifice something. I get to school, I go through school, and when I'm in school, the first thing that you realize is discrimination. People are like, you're not from here. Why are you here? They don't understand why you're there. There's that segregation, like, you can't do this because you're not from here. So I decide, there's no way this will put me down. I have to do something extra. I decide to top my class. I top my primary school, secondary school. I graduate finally with a first class. That's atypical, the way my life has been. So different people experience different things, yeah? And along the way, if you don't have the good support system, then there's no way you'll make it out of it successful. Because as a young person, when you're a teenager, your emotions are all over. You need the same emotions that a refugee child has is the same emotion all these other children will have. So if someone is discriminating you, if someone is not acting positively towards you, then definitely you won't move past that. Absolutely. As much as there are many challenges we encounter as refugees, there are also positive things people do. For instance, where we are, there's this group of refugee students. They're under scholarship. They're being provided with opportunity to go to school. But they decided, since we're facing all this and we want to change the generation that is behind us, what can we do? Let's pull all these different resources together. And all these small monies that we have will either buy a book for another child or will have career mentorship programs. So there's so much we can do. As much as there's a negative side to it, there's also positive. Nothing is lost with all this.
Okay,
yeah.
That's important. I'm going to come back to you, the question. I'm going to ask you, think of one thing, one perception people have about refugees that you so much disagree with or you want to challenge. I'll get back to you. But first, I want to ask you, if somebody picked the phone, let's say in X country, and seek your advice, one of the representatives of UNFPA in that country, and they are dealing with a new humanitarian situation, as the chief who wants to offer an immediate advice in the way they should set up a humanitarian response to that country. And I know this might sound too technical for some many and might sound too political for others, but really, what type of advice that you would give for a representative of UNFPA office in that country to set up a response that is basically would capture some of the elements we're talking about today without compromising the urgency of doing some service delivery?
How much time do you have?
Oh, yeah. And how much money I thought you were asking that would cost.
Okay, so of course, there's all the technical standard things that I or any of my colleagues would provide for the rep to make sure that the response meets certain basic criteria. But speaking specifically to the topic that we're talking about now, one thing that is critical and which has been raised at the World Humanitarian Summit, which we're achieving through the Youth Compact, is making sure that the people who we are developing the response for are actually involved in the response. So one very solid piece of advice that I would give, that we give to the representatives, is right from the start, how are you involving the affected population in developing these programs? And not just in developing the programs, but in implementing the programs, are you checking in with them? What is your mechanism for engaging with them to make sure that what is being provided actually meets their needs? And specific for young people, because as UNFPA, ensuring that young people fulfill their potential is at the heart of our mandate. A young person's potential does not change because there's been a disaster or a flood or a crisis, or you're in your house, or you're displaced within your country, or you're without your country. You still have that potential to be achieved, and therefore the response that UNFPA puts forward needs to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the young people that this response is supposed to serve.
That's brilliant. That was a very, very good piece of advice, I believe, that will be well heard. So what do you would like to challenge in terms of perception people have about refugees?
I'll speak about the perception from where I come from.
Okay.
There are two things that I normally say about refugees. Yeah. One of it is that they are queue jumpers. Like they depend on aid, they don't do anything. The second thing that is normally said about refugees is that they get paid by the UNHCR. They get paid and they don't do anything, they just sit around, and every end month they get maybe a check or something. Yeah. But you see, that perception that has been created within that particular environment has led to no one wanting to find out more about what a refugee can give. Yeah? A refugee has skills, they have knowledge, they have qualifications, but this perception that has been engraved in the community's mind is making them judge them even before finding out why exactly are you here? What can you do? They don't give them that opportunity. So you find out when you're going to apply for a job, someone asks you, but I thought UNHCR takes care of you. So why are you applying for a job? You don't get that job. So that's the perception that I'm fighting against, perception that refugees cannot do anything for themselves. They only depend on aid. The refugees are capable, they're self-reliant, and when they're given support, not only aids, sometimes it's all about mentorship. If you're good in this skill, why don't you take someone and mentor them? They become something worth looking at or talking about than just leaving them like that and leaving them to the society to just judge them and talk badly about them.
That's brilliant, and that resonates a lot. I mean, when I worked with, luckily for UNFPA in a program with Iraq and the Iraq office, I have seen some of these sentiments where sometimes you ask people for solidarity, and solidarity comes with understanding. So if people are not showing enough solidarity, sometimes we have to question, are we communicating well? Are we really delivering the messages? I think sometimes we don't really pay enough attention to that. So that's a very good piece of advice. Maybe to conclude with something, absolutely, but I'm going to ask something for it because it has to be more difficult. So you can answer that question. I want to ask you to speak about the host communities, because that's an interaction with the host communities is going to make or break the whole experience somehow until you have. It's one thing, the food, the shelter, all that you could deliver. But another thing is about how the host community could show that very fine nature of a human spirit when they are in solidarity with others. How we can trigger that in a better way?
Well, I think the first point to make clear is that it doesn't need for us to trigger that. Host communities have been hosting refugees and are often the first ones to be providing support ever before any of us come on the ground. And it's important to recognize the role host communities play. The second important thing is that most refugees are not in refugee camps. They're actually in host communities, and programs that are being developed or are implementing activities, support, etc., for refugees do not discriminate between a refugee and the host community. You're providing services or assistance for your target population. It could be the refugee. It could, many times actually, host communities are often not in that much better shape than the refugees that are hosting, and they often don't get that recognition. Right. But going back to the point about potential, and I know, and I say this from a very personal place in my heart, I know the mandate to ensure a young person's potential is fulfilled sounds very aspirational, but I want to use myself as an example. I come from Nigeria, but I'm from the region formerly known as Biafra, and we fled my country, my family, we fled the country during the Civil War. I won't go into all of the details, but where I am today shows that the potential that I had was fulfilled. It is not aspirational. If the services and the support and the education and the system is there, every young person can achieve their potential. Being a refugee should just be a point of fact. It should not be stigma. It should not be at the expense of what you can achieve in your life. And it's all of our responsibility to make sure that happens. I am an example of what action on the ground looks like when it's done properly.
That's brilliant. Isn't that brilliant? I mean, let's put our hands together. This was, you know, it's amazing seeing you serving for the UN for this number of years without losing the same spirit of activism and the need to respond. I think that speaks loads of your qualities as a professional, and the message you have carried here and before to the World Humanitarian Summit, I think, has been heard loud and clear. So I think this is a great conclusion, although the discussion was getting to a very interesting place. We're sharing more personal experiences and reflections. But I think, as a wrap-up for the day, if there's something I take from the summit, is the fact refugees is not a stigma, and migration is not a problem. Migration is a phenomenon that has been managed historically, and refugee is a situation that requires for all of us to show our global solidarity, and that's why the agenda was called Shared Humanity, because I believe it's required from all of us to know that we have a share to pay in taking this and elevating this suffering. So I thank you very much for joining the social media and the digital media zone. Is way more than just social, it's digital in every sense, and to have this very good conversation. Thank you very much, and good luck.